Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me share a quote with you. The great Les Brown once said, "You can't see the picture when you're in the frame." If you've felt stuck in your fitness, mindset, or life as a whole, head down to the link in the show notes and reach out to learn more about Project Endure Coaching so that we can help you step outside of the frame and bridge the gap between who you are now and who you want to be. We can't wait to hear from you. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 192. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and also in the great state of Pennsylvania, but on the other side, we have a very, very, very special guest, JP Singer. JP, how are you?
What's going on, man? I forget that you're in Philadelphia. We're rivals, the West and the East Coast, West Coast. Well, not really coast, but
we would be rivals, although I'm a New York sports fan, so
that's right. I knew you weren't a Philly fan for some reason, but yeah, man, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well also. And, we were just chatting a little bit before we hit record, but it's funny. The microphone you're using was actually in this room that I'm recording this podcast in, because was it last year or was it 2 years ago? It was last year, right?
That's a good question. I think last year.
Yeah, 2024, you came over to Philadelphia and we spent a few days filming a mini documentary to tell my story, which exists now. It's out on the internet, on YouTube. And that was really the first time we interacted more than just a phone call or a Zoom call. And I feel like it kicked off a cool friendship. And so I'm grateful for that time we got to spend together, that project we got to create. And I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a while. So here we are.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel the same. That documentary was definitely the Kickstarter for our relationship. And I think just the first time that we had spoken in general, I already knew and I could just already tell what kind of person you were and just the energy that you brought. And so I think that naturally just unfolded to where we are now, having this conversation and having this podcast. And you know that I love talking self-growth and all things surrounded around getting better in life. And so I'm not surprised that we're here today doing this.
Yeah. And we're going to have a great conversation. I have no doubt. Before I let you introduce yourself to people listening, I just want to make a note that the way we got connected in the first place was kind of one of those weird things where you can connect the dots looking backward. And I must have been at the gym in 2021, 2022, and I saw a guy wearing a shirt that I recognized, the brand. And so I just made a comment to him, "Hey man, I like your shirt." We kind of got talking. We became friendly at the gym. And then maybe 2 or 3 years after that, I was looking for someone to shoot some video for Project Endure. And he reached out to me and said, "I have a guy," and he connected us. And that wasn't a good fit at the time, I think just for logistics reasons. But we stayed in touch and here we are. And it's funny how you never know, one little comment or conversation can, lead to a bunch of dominoes being knocked over to something really cool. So with that being said, JP, if you had to introduce yourself to people listening who don't know who you are, how would you introduce yourself?
Oh, I know that this isn't really that deep of a question for most people because most people would just answer this and say, "I'm so and so. This is what I do for work. This is where I live." And for some reason, immediately my mind went deep. Like, who am I? What do I represent? What am I here on this earth to do? And it's so funny that I just immediately go to that place. But I guess to keep it surface level for now, because I'm sure that we will get pretty deep on this podcast. My name's JP Singer. Currently, I'm a freelance creator. So I do a lot of video editing work. I do filming as well. And basically for the last 2 years, I've been, working on my business in that realm. But In general, very passionate about self-growth, have been since my early 20s. I'm a passionate vegan. I'm into lots of different things in life, everything from health and fitness to traveling to you name it. I would say I'm a lover of life and all the experiences that are out there. I love doing new things and then just trying to figure out kind of what the purpose is of all of this, of life. I'm a pretty deep thinker and that's kind of how I would describe myself. It's kind of a little bit of everything. It's not, one thing. And I don't like to say that I am one thing because to me, I'm just a soul or a spiritual being experiencing all life has to offer. And so I can't really say that I am this or I am that. I'm just here experiencing.
Ooh. All right. So I knew we were going to go deep and we're starting off on a deep path. So I'm going to throw this quote at you. I knew this was something we would get to. It's the topic of death. So we'll talk about death a little bit before we get into more of your life and your story. But I have a quote from Jonathan Nolan who said, "To appreciate life, face the reality of death daily. If I had my life to live over again, I would form a habit nightly, composing myself thoughts of death. There is not another practice which so intensifies life." Tell me why death is such an important topic in your mind.
Oh, man, this is probably the most important thing I think in my life and how I operate. To me, death is everything. It is most importantly freedom. What do I mean by that? I mean that to me, death means that there's an end. And it doesn't mean that there actually is an end, right? It's not my belief, it's a fact. So knowing that there is an end, I think for me, I've learned to live my life from a place of if there is an end, why not do the things that we want to do? Why not be the person that you want to be? And I think a lot of people fear death and they fear, I don't, it's interesting. I'm not sure why people use the fear of death to play it small because to me, it's just the ultimate liberator. And that's why it is so important because I don't know, I'm a spiritual guy. I think something happens after this life. I don't know what that is. I can't say, but it's like, man, if something is after this, it means that this journey is finite. And so it just doesn't make sense for me to not live my life the exact way that I want to because it's going to end. And ultimately, I mean, I don't want to say it's not going to matter, but ultimately, like, you're going to leave all this behind. And so to me, like, death has just allowed me to be like, oh, okay, you want to start your own business? Do it. Oh, hey, you want to go travel to Europe for 3 weeks? Do it. Do you want to go start a band and drop out of college and, travel the country? Do it. Like, why do we hold ourselves back so much? And I think that it's from a place of fear. And so that's the key. If you use death, not from a place of fear, but from a place of liberation, that's when it becomes powerful.
You know, I'll play the other side of the equation just because I would love to hear your thoughts. And I'm sure there's someone out there thinking this. And we've actually talked about this behind the scenes, but you could look at death the way you just described, where it liberates us. Why not make the most of this life? You could also look at death and think, well, why does this matter? What's the point? Why push hard? Why play big? Why chase dreams if it's all just going to be gone someday anyway? How would you push back maybe against that side of the equation if you had to?
Well, I would simply ask people, okay, how does it feel to live that life?
Mm.
It sucks. Like at least if you're chasing your dreams and going after things, like I think people don't give as much credit to the fulfillment you get of going after something, even if you fail, versus the regret that you feel if you don't go after something. There's a big difference there. And I think people have the fear of failing, so they don't go after things, right? They think that that pain is going to be worse than, the pain of actually trying and failing and trying again. But I don't believe that. I believe that if you go after things in your life, even if you do fail, you're not going to look back on it as a failure. You're going to be so glad that you went after something and chances are you learned something from that and it guides you in a different way in your life that you weren't even expecting. So I mentioned the dropping out of school and starting a band thing earlier. It's because I did it in my early 20s, and that was my dream at the time, and I wanted to be, a rock star, whatever. And I look back on that time now, and it's like, sure, I wish, maybe would have taken it further, but I'm so happy I did it. And I don't have that regret anymore. I don't have that, oh, I wish I would have did this. I really wanted to start a band in my 20s and see what I could do. Now it's just memories and it's the lessons
Mm.
learned. I learned so much and I got to experience so much culture and meet so many different people, right? So it's like, objectively, did I fail? Yes, I didn't become a rock star. But in my own life, I didn't fail. And I think that's the difference. And I think people don't realize that that's what you can take out of something. So if you do decide to live this life where, well, it doesn't matter anyway, why should I try? Well, chances are that pain of regret is probably going to weigh on you a lot heavier than you think.
Mm. I think that humans are curious by nature. I think that we're all curious and we're curious about different things. Some people care about outer space, some people care about what's in the ocean, some people care about what's inside, some people care about other things, but we all care to learn. We're curious, we want to know. And I think the frame that's been most helpful for me, at least in this season of life, is how do I minimize future regret? How do I make decisions today to minimize future regret? And I think looking back at past experiences, we can all agree with what you said, which is we are going to regret the things we didn't do more than the things that we did do. And I think part of looking back and feeling regret is wondering what could have happened, what would have happened if I just chased that dream, had that conversation, did that thing. And we don't get to fulfill that curiosity. If you're living in this moment and you get to make decisions, you could be curious about whatever you want. And then you get to go explore that with your actions. And that's such a special thing. It's such a gift because when we're not here anymore, we lose that opportunity. We don't have that chance. And so I know it was a big thing when we were younger, but YOLO, right? You only live once.
Yeah.
It was kind of a cheesy thing that, it was a fad and it flew in and out, but there's a lot of truth to it. We get to do this once.
No, I mean, you're totally right. Yeah. You have to think from that perspective. And I'm sure you could probably attest to this as well, Joe. Like the older that we get, the seemingly faster time goes by. It's not going to slow down. Time waits for no one. And time is the only currency that really, generally speaking, if you average out the life expectancy of men and women, right? We all generally have the same amount of time here on Earth. Of course, that's not guaranteed, right? Some people leave this world earlier or whatnot, but I think in general, it's like whether you're a billionaire or you have $10 in your bank account, generally speaking, on on the currency level of time, you're the same. So I think that people forget that is that we are all wealthy in time, but yet we spend our time as if we have endless amounts, as if we can make more of it, and we can't.
Yeah. There's a quote, and this is on the longer side. So I'll read this, we'll talk about it, and then I'll hit you with the first big question of the podcast. But this is from an author. Their name is actually don't know their first name. Their first initial is C, and their last name is Joy Bell. But they said, I have come to accept the feeling of not knowing where I am going, and I have trained myself to love it because it is only when we are suspended in midair with no landing in sight that we force our wings to unravel and, alas, begin our flight. And as we fly, we still may not know where we are going to, but the miracle is in the unfolding of the wings. You may not know where you're going, but know that so long as you spread your wings, the winds will carry you. And I think there's really something beautiful about, again, playing it big, taking some risks, going after what you want, doing hard things where you're forced to be in midair for a second, for a minute, for a week, a month, a year, whatever it is. And you have to spread your wings because there's no other way. And I'm curious for you if there are thoughts that come up with that quote. And then beyond that, the question that I'll ask is when you look back at your life to this point, what's the hardest thing that you've ever had to handle that you did not choose? Or in other words, what's the hard thing that you've had to handle where you've been forced to spread your wings?
Yeah, so that quote reminds me of another quote, and it's short and sweet, and it's commit now and figure out the rest later. And I've tried to tell myself this over and over and over again. It's something I've learned in business as well, is like, you're never going to feel ready. And I know you have a quote that's, ready is an action or a decision, not a feeling,
This
right?
is, yep.
Right. So it's the same concept. And I think in life we want to feel 100% ready because we want to mitigate that risk, right? But that's the thing, is like you're never you're never going to do that. You're never going to feel ready enough. And at some point you just have to commit and, you know, like you said, grow your wings as you're jumping off the proverbial cliff. And it sounds scary, but yeah, that's where you learn how to handle things, and most importantly, how you grow, right? Because if we're not put in an unknown environment, we're not going to grow. It's just plain and simple. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is a time in my life where I've had to go through that process without choosing it, right? Because there's been many times where I've chosen that, whether it's starting my own business or, just doing hard things in general. But I think the one time in my life that I did not choose this, and it really did kickstart a lot of my self growth and transformation, was in my early 20s. I went through a pretty serious bout of depression. And at the time, my band had just broken up. I had just gotten out of a 6-year relationship. I moved out of my parents' house and I was working at Chili's as a waiter, serving up fajitas. And, at that moment in time, I had put my identity as all of these things. I am the singer of my band who, was dating this person who lived with my parents in this town, in this city. When all of that was gone, suddenly it was like, who am I? I don't know. And for the first time, I was kind of put into life where I felt like I had jumped off that cliff, where the path was no longer there. And so I had to create my own. I had to grow those wings, right? And that was definitely a very, very hard process. Obviously, not knowing how I was going to get through. Because at the time, I think I, resorted to some numbing mechanisms, whether it was drugs or alcohol or um, just distractions. And it wasn't until I really just faced that full on and sat with my thoughts and faced that fear
Mm.
of not knowing who I was and what my purpose was. And it's not like I got better overnight, but I started to show up to the process of getting better. And that was the difference. So showing up to the process now means everything to me, because through that experience and through other experiences where I've done this the same, to just show up and know that I'm not going to feel ready, you just get that incremental growth that over time you look back and think, "Oh wow." Like over the decade of my 20s, just putting in the time to develop self growth and figure out who I was, that compounded to where I am now, and having so much confidence in who I am, and that self autonomy.
Mm. I have no doubt there's someone listening to this, if not many people listening to this, who feel lost in a sense. Maybe it's in a small way. Maybe a piece of who they thought they were has been taken away. Maybe it's in a big way. Maybe it's in every way, like you described, where someone just feels like their life has been turned upside down. And if you could go back to that time in your life and therefore maybe give some guidance to people who are in that time currently, what would you say is the place to start, right? If someone got, crushed by a wave, right? I don't know if you surf, I don't, but you've been in the ocean, you get smacked by a wave and you feel for a second like you're upside down and you have no sense of what way is up and you're kind of just lost. How do you navigate that when it happens?
It's such a good question. And I feel like, maybe for different people, different things would work, but I can just speak from my own experience. And I think the first thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's one of the biggest things right off the bat is, especially for a lot of men. We don't like to reach out for help, especially when it comes to mental health. And right, because the stigma's been given that, if we cry, if we have emotions, this and that we're not men, right? That's bull. Um, I'll keep it clean on the podcast, but you know what I mean? um, so yeah, reach out for help because you have to acknowledge that there's something's going on. And the first step is being able to talk about it. Talking about it with yourself may not be the first step because obviously, if you're in your own thoughts, chances are you're going to be having these thoughts of whatever you're going through and not necessarily from the help side. So yeah, I would say, reach out for help and start talking to somebody who can start shifting your perspective because I think it's all a shift in perspective. Granted, there's probably, a lot of chemical changes happening in your body as well. But you know, what's crazy is you can create chemical shifts in your body with the way that you think. Um, and 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 so I think you have to start seeing things from a different lens. You have to pull back because a lot of times if you're in a situation like that, if you're suffering through depression, like you're so deep into your emotions and your feelings that oftentimes you can't see things logically, and you have to be able to pull back and see from that outside perspective. Because when you do that, that's when you see like, oh, it's obvious. Here's the areas that need work. Here's how you could change. Here's how you could start to get better. So that's what I would say would be the first step is to, reach out, start talking about these things. The next thing I think is the most important thing is that movement is well-being. And I don't even necessarily mean that in the physical activity sense, although that could be one way you could do it. But you need to have movement in your life. You need to be progressing towards something. That might be waking up and taking a shower that day for somebody. For another person, that may be running 80 miles on the stairs in Philadelphia. Joe, looking at you. Movement, it doesn't matter where you are on the scale, but the feeling of progressing and moving towards something and getting better, I think is essential to human health and life and fulfillment. And that's, I think, where I would start. From there, I think there's lots of other ways you can, do things. I did a lot of solo traveling. I did a lot of sitting with myself. I, would listen to Tony Robbins audio, books, or well, at the time it was CDs. Um, you know, so there's different mediums and outlets like podcasts, right? But I think, yeah, ask for help, movement, and then surround yourself with good things, good energy. So whether that's other people, whether that's, an audiobook or podcast or content, around self-development, self-growth, all those things can help and just show up. Just show up. Not every day is going to be, 100%, right? Just show up every day and just feel that momentum moving forward. Anyway, that was a long answer, but hope that was helpful.
It was great, and it sparked a bunch of things for me. I'll plug two other podcast episodes while I'm thinking about them. The first is, you said you wanted to keep it clean. My first guest, episode 2 of this podcast, Coach Sam Tooley, dropped the F bomb like 30 seconds into the recording, and that's just him as a person. So that went out the window with episode 2. So feel free to use
Okay.
expletives as you like.
Noted.
And then two, episode 41 of this podcast with Jerry Ike, just to go back to something you said earlier, ready as a decision. Jerry talked about this phrase, ready, fire, aim. Usually it's ready, aim, fire, but ready, fire, aim, meaning you just have to take action before you fully know the direction, before you fully have the picture, because action creates clarity. So that's a great episode. But to get back to what you said about movement, I think that is so important, not only in the physical sense, but like you said, moving towards something. I think humans are built to build. We are made to create. We are not made to consume hours and hours and hours of content on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. We are meant to problem solve. We are meant to be creative. We are meant to do things, to move toward things. And it brings me to this thought, and I've said this many times, but everything we want as people is on the other side of hard. And that doesn't mean you have to go run 80 miles on stairs. It doesn't mean you have to start a business, but it does mean that when you're faced with the decision of you're having a tough day and you could either sit in bed and scroll on your phone, and that's the easy option, or you could get up and take a shower and go for a walk, and that's your hard option. What you want is the hard option. It might not feel like it in the moment, but you will feel better on the other side of that hard option. And I am just so convinced that we are meant to do hard things. We're meant to build and create. And so I'm so glad you said that. And movement as medicine is so much more than just fitness.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I totally agree that the feeling that you're looking for is on the other side. There just happens to be a delay.
Mm.
And that's where we struggle as humans. We want the feeling right now. And rarely does that happen. Or if we do, it's more of a quick dopamine hit. So, if we eat the junk food, if we procrastinate and watch the Netflix, it feels good in the moment, but it will feel infinitely worse a week down the road if you don't, like you said, move towards something. Because how many of us have looked back earlier, like you said in the podcast, and realized, oh, all this time has gone by and I didn't do anything right. It's like what could I have achieved if I had been working towards something? And I think about that all the time. And there's, plenty of times I've done it in my life where I'm just like, dude, if you would have just started this thing 3 years ago and just put even minimal effort, the compounding effects of it, where you would be now. Um, it's crazy. But that being said, there's been other things in my life where I have put in that compounding investment of showing up every day, and it's paid dividends. And I think that's how we have to think about it, right? It's like, yes, you're thinking about it like investing money into the stock market. I know that this is a analogy we use often, Joe, in our calls, but it sucks to spend that money now. But in the long term, that money will be worth infinitely more. Versus if you don't spend it all 10 years down the road, you're gonna be so mad at yourself that you didn't do it. Because you're gonna be seeing all your friends who did and they're, driving
Yeah.
their new BMW or going on vacations or whatever, luxury or expensive thing, or just having the freedom of their time.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's never too late to start that process. The other part is that if you invest your money in the stock market, you'll have to ride out a lot more volatility than if you keep it in a bank account. But there's more reward over the long term if you're able to endure the ups and the downs. And when you pursue things in life, when you build a business, when you go chase a dream, there are going to be really, really great days. There are going to be really, really hard days. And you have to be able to come back to the middle and find this steadiness of you're going to keep going, whether you've had 10 great days in a row or 10 terrible days in a row. You're going to keep showing up, putting one foot in front of the other. And it's that long game, that willingness to be patient, to delay gratification. It is just so, so, so powerful. But like you said, there's oftentimes a big lag between effort and outcome, and we have to be able to be patient.
Yeah, and the volatility part is so crucial. I think a lot of people forget that step of the process, right? It it just comes along with it, especially I use running a business as an example just because it's where I'm at in my life, but right now I'm in a period of business where I'm overwhelmed. Just straight point blank period. I have too much on my plate and and it doesn't feel good. So it's like every day I'm just waking up and just it weighs heavy on me, and it affects my habits, right? Where I work all day long, and then at night I'm like, well, I need a break, and then I'm scrolling on my phone until, midnight or whatever, and then the cycle repeats and repeats. But I keep showing up, and I know that on the other side, it's not always going to be like that. There's going to be days where it's more smooth sailing, and you can apply that to literally anything. You know, if you're learning a language, there's going to be days where you feel like you can't speak at all, and then there's other days you can have an hour conversation and you feel like you're fluent. If you're on a weight loss journey, there's going to be weeks where you absolutely crush your goals. There's going to be weeks where you cave, where you eat bad things, where you don't go to the gym, where your workouts, you don't have energy, right? And so, yeah, you have to think about things from the long-term perspective, is that on a day-to-day basis, things could be anywhere from 0 to 100. You can't predict that. But when you pull out over the long term and over consistency, things always trend upwards.
Yeah. One of the things I've been thinking about, and I used this analogy for the very first time with someone else who was, having a rough patch. I'm working with them, through coaching to develop some better habits. And they they more or less said, you should just give up on me, right? Like it's been a rough week, it's been a rough month. They have this limiting belief that like they're just never going to get better. And I told them, like I invest in people the same way I would invest in the stock market. I'm not buying a stock or working with someone for a month thinking, man, in 1 month, I'm going to 10x the return here. And this person's going to be so much better, or this stock is going to make so much money. No, I'm going to put my money in a company that in 10 years or 2 or 3 decades is going to be around and thriving and strong and robust. And this, I look at people the same way, right? The process of growth and development is not something that happens in a week or a month or a year. And like you said, there are great times, there are hard times, there are times where you jump forward and accelerate growth. And there are times where you get in a rut and feel like you fell backward 3 steps. And that's all part of it. But what is important is that there's this willingness and this mental drive that you are moving in a direction over time. And I think being able to visualize and feel that and remember that, or even be reminded of that from time to time, is really important. And it brings me back to one other podcast episode, number 147 with Chris Cosme. Him and I talked about how excellence, or high performance, as you and I talk about, is an act of rebellion. It's an act of rebellion against what's easiest, against what's popular, against what's convenient. And I think what is easiest or popular or convenient when we have a bad week or a bad day is to just throw up our hands and say, well, I might as well stop trying because it's not going well. You have to rebel against that. And that takes effort, it takes energy, and sometimes it requires support.
100%, man. First of all, are you remembering these podcast episodes off the top of your head? Because that's impressive. That thought just came to me.
A couple of them. Yeah. I spend way too much time thinking about this stuff, though.
Okay, that's awesome. But no, what you said made me think about something really, really important in terms of wanting to give up or feeling like you're never going to achieve, what you want. And I think for me, what's been really, really helpful, and I can even circle this back in my brain to when I was 15 years old, maybe younger. And I was chubby my whole life. Growing up, I got made fun of, And I remember the first time that I ever like started to lose weight. The first time I ever like got on the treadmill and ran more than like a mile. And it was specifically this one time I remember I ran 5 miles. And I felt so badass in that moment. And it was just like this switch flipped in my head. And why I'm saying this is because I think it's so important to break thresholds in your life. What do I mean by that? I mean that we limit ourselves only to what we've experienced. And if you don't set new thresholds, you're going to default back to what those experiences are. And so that's why I tell people break thresholds, get wins under your belt. But the only way that you can do that is if you keep showing up. And I don't mean that you have to get to your ultimate win or your ultimate threshold, but you need to get to the next one. Because if you don't get to that one, well, you're just going to stay where you've been. And it's like staying in that comfort zone. And that's why it's important to have that movement to work towards something, because then you're working towards a threshold that you didn't think that you could do. One of the easiest ways that you can do this is through physical movement. And I've done this in my life through, certain things like running a marathon. I never thought that I'd be able to run 26 miles until I did. Now I have that threshold. So now in my mind, it's like, well, I ran 26. I could probably run 50. Do I want to? No. But I know that if I wanted to, I could do it. And that's why it's so important. And I think this is why you see a lot of really successful people who just they go after these different ventures and these different things that people are just like, "Oh my God, like how are they so successful all the time?" Well, it's because they're putting themselves out there with the belief that they can do it. But if you don't have that belief, like Yeah, of course you're not going to like take the action steps. So if you're somebody listening to this right now, you feel like, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm never going to get to my ultimate goal. Maybe your goal is to lose 100 pounds. No, but maybe lose 20 first and think, oh my God, I lost 20 pounds. I didn't think I was capable of that. Well, once you do that, well, it's like, well, if I lost 20, I can lose 30. If I lost 30, I can lose 75. And so setting thresholds in your life, it's just a reset for your brain to just kick out all those limiting beliefs and understand that you are capable of more. It doesn't mean that it's not going to take work, but just having that belief is the most essential starting point. And thankfully, I've done so many uncomfortable things in my life and I've broken that threshold so many times that I have a lot of self-confidence in myself. And so if I want to do something, I generally believe that I can do it. Of course, I still have fears. Everyone does. But I operate from a place of possibility, not what if I fail? What if I make it? What else am I capable of?
I don't have much to add to what you said because I just agree so much with all of it and you said it so well. I think the point at the end that I would love to highlight before I ask you another big question is that what if goes both ways, right? When you think of pursuing something, pushing a limit, taking a risk. I think it's human nature to think first of the negative. Well, what if I fail? What if this goes wrong? What if I don't make it? Right? We want to protect ourselves. We want to protect ourselves from the downside of our feelings being hurt, our ego being bruised, so on and so forth. But what if goes both ways? There is the other side of that equation. What if this goes well? What if I push past this threshold? What if I exceed the goal? What if this opens doors that I can't even begin to fathom right now? And I think we have to make the intentional effort to think that way because, like I said, I think we are hardwired to think about the negative to protect ourselves. But there's so much possibility. And I love that word possibility on the other side of risk, of action, of pushing limits. And so when we think about pushing limits, breaking thresholds, doing hard things, and you look at your life up until this point, what would you say is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose? And why did you do that thing?
Hmm. I think the hardest thing that I ever did, and it wasn't even hard from the actual logistics perspective of the action that it took, but I think it was just the most mentally hard. The biggest fear I had to overcome was leaving my stable job, my stable 9 to 5, where I was making, a decent salary and starting my own company and deciding to work for myself. It's a goal that I always had, something I always wanted to do. And, I found myself over many years kind of saying the same messages that I'm telling you, right? But then leaving this huge thing on the table that had always been my number one, which was to work for myself and, build my own path. And I think that was definitely hands down one of the hardest fears I had to overcome, right? I had so much fear just around I'm going to leave this job, I'm going to make zero money, I'm going to blow through all my savings in a year and I'm going to be, cooked. Right? Like and that was just not true. It was the furthest thing from true. Yeah, sure there were some months where the income wasn't great and like that fear really crept in, but now for the last 2 years, I've consistently showed up for myself. And what's funny is just like operating from that place of fear, the more that I let that fear creep in, it seemed like the more that I would trend that direction, right? Like, mm, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm starting to get desperate. I need to start, asking anyone and everyone for money or projects or whatever. When I just let go and I was like, dude, like you're going to be okay. Just have confidence in yourself and just continue to show up and be proactive, not from a place of fear, but from a place of opportunity. then all of a sudden it was like all these projects came in, and this person that you had sent an email to 3 months ago replied, and like, and it's so funny, man. And like I truly believe in energy and the flow of life, and like what you put out into the world attracts back to you. You can call it the law of attraction, you can call it whatever you want, but I've seen it be true too many times to not think that it is a legitimate software operating system for humans in this world. Because the more energy that you exude, the greater energy that you exude, the more you're going to attract other people who are just operating on that same frequency. I mean, you ever just walk into a room and you get a feeling about someone?
Yep.
There's truth to that. And so, what feeling are you giving off to other people? And if you're giving off the feeling of I'm not capable, I can't do this, I'm going to fail. Well, you're not going to really surround yourself with people who are crushing it in life and, doing all these things, which is why you should surround yourself with those people, whether it's, with a coach or like we already talked about, starting just even with the podcast and things like that. So I think it's just really funny, man, that just letting go, and just showing up to the process every day and just accepting that volatility has helped me to get through this. And, I'm on track to have this year be, more successful than last year. And so things are trending upward. And yeah, man, I think that that was just like one of the biggest things in my life that I really had to overcome. And here I am. And you know what? There's still no guarantees. That's the crazy part. Is like it's not that like I made it, like it's not like, oh, everything's cool and dandy now. Like, no, like I still have to make money for myself. Like I still have to make sure that I'm doing those things to keep this momentum going. And so, of course, I find myself in a moment where things have kind of compounded into me being overwhelmed right now. But like I know that like me getting through this is just setting myself up for, yeah, just more of that growth later, no matter how it comes. So anyway, long-winded response, but that I think has been definitely the hardest thing.
I can relate. As someone who left, I went to three years of graduate school, got a job, and then quit said job to start my own thing. And I can relate on so many levels. And a couple things that come to mind because you mentioned the busy, overwhelming season that you're in a positive way right now. It makes me think of this phrase that I saw a few months back, but it said, I can't complain about having a lot on my plate when the whole goal was to eat.
Yes,
Right. And
I was
like
thinking
when you,
that same thing.
right, like when you and me start out, I'm sure this is the same for anybody who starts a business, takes a risk. Like you'd give anything to have an overwhelmingly busy month. Right.
Yes. Dude, that is such a good point. I love that you bring that up because I thought about this the other day. I think even me and you talked about this. Like rewind 10 years ago and tell JP, hey, this is where we are. Like I'd be ecstatic. And it's so funny too, though, that like these monuments, these certain goals, like you think that they're gonna like change your life. Like the first time I ever had $10,000 in my bank account, right? Like I thought like that was the goal. Like if I could just do that. And it's like, okay, like like on that day when I wake up, like I didn't feel any different. So it's just like that's why it's so important to just focus back on the process. But no, like I think like looking back does really help to give you perspective because yeah, young JP would just be so proud that I actually took the steps to be where I am and that I'm controlling my destiny. And and I feel an immense sense of pride in that, right? Because it's like when you have that self autonomy, and you don't have to start a business to feel that, but obviously just in our situation, like you take when you take control of life in that way and you control all aspects of your life. Yes, in one way your back's kind of up against the wall, but in another way you learn how to think and how to operate to make sure that things do go well. So I think that that's just a great perspective to have of like looking back and being like, yeah, your younger self would be thrilled. Or, just to have one project, they would have been ecstatic. And now, your plate's full. So it's like, yeah, be grateful for that because you wanted to eat.
Yeah. So another point that I wanted to hit on that you mentioned was just the energy piece. Letting go of fear, leaning into confidence, putting out good energy into the world, and then kind of it almost feels like a weird coincidence, but it happens too often for it to actually be a coincidence. So there's got to be something behind the scenes. But that it is so true, right? Like I've had these moments, and I should really go back through all of the journals that I've written because I journal every day and I've done so from probably the beginning of graduate school. So it's been almost a decade. When I started my business, there are so many times where I'd write in my journal, it feels like I'm building a house of cards. And what I meant by that was it felt like I could wake up any morning and like every client I worked with could just text me and say I'm done, and all of a sudden I would have no business anymore. And there was just this fear, this anxiousness that I carried with me. And what I've noticed over time, similar to you, is I'll have maybe a day where three clients have to, this person lost their job, that person got sick, this person just ghosted me because that happens as well. um, and I'm just down, and I'm like, this sucks. And I'll journal and I'll start off all sad. And then I'll kind of, give myself a bit of a pep talk in the journal. And by the end of the journal, I'm like, all right, you just have to, chest up, head up, keep doing your thing, control the controllables, add value to people, be there, et cetera, et cetera. And then literally 3 hours later that day, someone who I reached out to 6 months ago finally responds to an email. Somebody has a cousin who wants coaching, and I run into someone else on the street who's like, sign me up. And it's like, how does this happen, right? And I think not everything in the world can be measured, but sometimes it's those things that you can't explain but to be true, that you really just have to lean into. And I would challenge anybody, again, it doesn't have to be starting a business, but if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I should take that risk, stop listening to this podcast right now, pause it, you can come back to it, go do the thing, take a small step in that direction, put it out into the universe, see what happens, and I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man.
So one more thing I want to hit on before we move to the final two questions. I know this about you, and I wasn't sure if you would use this as your answer to that last big question, but you quit smoking cigarettes at a certain point in your life. And
Mm.
it's not a topic, I've talked with people who have, done hard drugs and stopped that, or alcohol, stop that, but cigarettes just hasn't come up in almost 200 episodes. And so I'm curious, just if someone listening relates directly to this, could you talk a little bit about stopping smoking?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I didn't even think about that as an answer because that was one of the hardest things I had to do in my life. Um, I think cigarette smoking comes down to habit interruption. And I think that's a lot of things in our life. If you're a procrastinator, if you're an addict on your phone, I'm an addict on my phone. I will claim that all day. Um, and it's funny, I put my email in that brick device that we had talked about. Now I keep getting all
Mhm.
these emails and like I'm in their feed and like I know eventually I'm gonna buy it. So I'm just like waiting. I'm just like like I'm just like deep in their funnel right now. But it is funny. Like you need that physical thing to just break the habit. With smoking, well, with phone addiction too. I mean, there's a chemical reaction in your brain that happens. And for me, what helped me was I had to stop some of the triggers that were causing the habit. And the biggest one was drinking because I used to be able to quit smoking. I probably quit smoking 10 times, in my life, in my over 10 years of smoking cigarettes. I probably quit, 10 times where I stopped for legitimately months, 3, 4 months. But then I would go out drinking with my friends. And in that moment, I'd be like, oh, it's okay to just have one. So then I'd buy a pack and I was like, yeah, I'll buy a pack. I'll smoke a couple. I'll give it away. No, that's not gonna happen. That's like, I started to have it back up the next morning. I was like, oh, I'll just finish these off. And then before I knew it, I was buying another pack. And then yeah, the addiction's back in. So you have to stop the triggers of something and you have to understand and know what that is. So for me, the biggest one with smoking was drinking. And once I cut out drinking for a significant part of my life, I was able to then, quit for the several months again. But then I didn't have that trigger that brought me back to it. So if there's anything in your life, whether it's smoking or something else, like figure out what those triggers are that is causing you to do that thing. And then you have to interrupt that. You have to break those triggers and you have to create, either new triggers for new habits, or you just have to like find a way to make sure that those triggers don't come back into your life. Um, Other than that, man, it was hard. Pure like willpower, to start the process. Like, I don't really have a better answer than that. Like, I mean, smoking is highly, highly, highly addictive. And the idea of smoking a cigarette is still appealing to me. I haven't had one in so many years, but sometimes if I smell one, like that's how deeply ingrained it is. But obviously, I don't have like, habit triggers stored in my body anymore, or my routine. So there's nothing that's just like causing me to go smoke a cigarette. But like the
Yeah.
addiction's still in there.
Mm. Maybe in a future conversation we can break that down a little bit more, but in the interest of time, I will move us on to the next question. So we've got two more. This one's real simple. So this is the Project Endure podcast, and when you hear the word endure or endurance, what comes to mind for you? What does that mean to you?
I think that endurance ultimately means the ability to keep moving, whether it's 1 mile or 1 inch,
Mm.
and just to not stop. And endurance also reminds me of resilience. And resilience has played a big role in my life because resilience means the ability to bend but not break.
Mm.
And endurance, I think, is the effort that you sustain while being resilient, right? It's the ability to just keep going. And yeah, I think that like no matter what is happening, it goes back to what we talked about, movement, working towards something. It doesn't matter if, that endurance is your movement of getting up and taking a shower that day, or if it's running 100-mile ultra race. We all have to endure through life. And so you have to find ways to make sure that you are moving throughout it and that it's not passing you by, because ultimately that's what's going to keep you going forward.
Love it. This isn't my quote. I don't know who to attribute it to, but the equation is that resilience is endurance with direction,
Mm,
or resilience equals endurance times direction, because you can run in circles your whole life and call that endurance, but if you're not moving towards something that you want, that is meaningful to you as a person, then what is the point of endurance if you're not moving towards something?
yeah, that's very true.
So, with that being said, this last question means a lot to me. It's a question that I ask guests because what you say will reach someone that needs it. And I've been there, you've been there. We've needed a spark, we've needed encouragement, we've needed some guidance. And so, for anybody listening to this who's just going through a hard season, a tough time, that might feel lost, stuck, down, depressed, etc., and they just need to hear something from someone who's been there, who's done that, who's worked through it, what would you say to that person who's on the other side of this podcast?
I would say firstly, I would say it's okay to feel what you're feeling. Life is very hard. But I think the most important thing that we can do is to just show up for ourselves in each moment and recognize that some of those moments are really going to suck. Some of those moments are going to be blissful and joyful. Some of those moments we're going to be unmotivated, we'll be bored. But that's what life is. It is that volatility. It is experiencing the highest of the highs, the lowest of the lows, and everything in between. And so you have to trust and believe that things get better only if you keep showing up. Because again, it ties back to that movement. If you let things dictate your life, you will never create the life that you want. But if you show up in each moment and know that even right now, your effort may not give you the thing that you really, really want to achieve or the feeling that you want to have or just getting through the day, know that the investment that you put into showing up each day does and will pay dividends down the road, but only if you show up for yourself that day. So, like I said, I don't care if it's an inch, if it's a mile, if it's taking a shower, if it's running 5 miles. I don't care what it is. Just do something to show up for yourself and to move forward in some way and have faith that the season that you're in, the feeling that you're in will not last forever, but it's up to you to move forward despite all of it.
I think that's a mic drop moment. And I think that I think that's it. Now, before I officially wrap us up, JP, I would love if you could tell people a little bit more about where to find you, what you're up to. I think, one of the special things about these conversations is that people just got to know you, and there might be someone out there who wants to get to know you even more or check out what you're creating, things that you're doing. So where can people find you?
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on Instagram _JP Singer. You can also find me on YouTube, JP Singer. I do try to put content out there. I've been making more of an effort. And I talk about a lot of these things. And I am a videographer and editor, so I do things in kind of more of a creative way. So if you enjoy introspection about life, about the lessons learned, about different topics, everything from how to get over procrastination to why it feels so much different than we thought it would feel about growing up. I have all that on my YouTube and Instagram as well, and I think those are my biggest platforms where I'm active. So yeah, Instagram _JP Singer, and then YouTube JP Singer.
I will link both of those in the description to make it easy. I will also link the documentary that you created about my story. And I will end by hyping you up and saying that this is genuine, and I mean this, and I've told you this off record. Um, your stuff is some of the best stuff I've ever seen when it comes to the cinematography, the creativeness, the storytelling. It just like you have a gift, and it's very clear that not only do you have a gift, but you hone that craft and that skill. And so, if anybody's on the fence about checking any of that out, go do it. You won't be disappointed. And JP, I appreciate you big time, man.
Thank you, man. And I appreciate you too. Thank you for those words. We all know artists aren't great at taking those types of compliments, but I'm going to receive it and take it with me. So thank you so much for that, man. It really means a lot. I'm grateful for you, brother. Grateful for our friendship. And just really appreciate you having me here and giving me a platform to share all the wild and crazy thoughts in my head.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.